Yeah, they have these different. There are these different functions and features you can add into it to kind of make life
Easier.
a little more organized, I guess would be the way to put it. Anyway, happy Sunday morning.
Good Monday. Well, Sunday and Mother's Day is what I
Right.
was trying to say there.
Same to your family. Um, all right. So yesterday we were talking about a few different things, and we kind of at the end of that we got into this conversation around, what does it look like if I'm buying a house and I decide I want to do things like pay it down faster, take off the life of the loan, no, the back end of the life of the loan. I want to pay up front. Things like that keep coming up. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples, okay? And just tell me how you would advise somebody who starts thinking this. Because in a lot of these cases, these are people who either A, have now purchased and are walking away from the closing table. B, they purchased recently and are now questioning, well, with the market being so strong for sellers, should I sell? Okay. So things like that come up. All right. So let's take the first one. So here's a client that I had. They bought their house about 2 years ago now.
Mm-hmm.
So at the closing table, and they have a strong income stream. So they have the ability to they're self-employed. They have the ability to really generate income, and they can kind of dial it up and dial it down. So in their mind, liquidity is an advantage for them. All right. So they walk away from the closing table, called me up the next day, and they said, "Hey, we have a quick question for you?" I said, "Sure. What's that?" He goes, "So we can just pay the year in advance, right?"
I mean, you can make that payment and the mortgage companies be more than happy to take it. You always got to remember that at the end of the day, we're collecting debt. So yeah, we're going to take whatever money you give, but it's not as simple as prepaying a year and everybody goes, oh, okay, forget about the next 12 payments or the next 11 payments. You're still going to have a monthly set schedule of payments due. I know. I think that I had a car loan where if you prepaid a lot, they kind of knocked it off the next payment. But I don't think that they're looking to do that with mortgages. One of the big things too is we do need to see an ability to manage a payment over time. That is an important part of qualifying. Exactly. It's an important part of how you qualify for the home in the first place. Mm-hmm. So it's, this is a big structured debt and they want structured monthly payments. So while you do have the ability to make a big payment up front at the beginning of the year, the thing that you need to remember is that, a lot of that is just going to be going towards extra principal, which isn't a bad thing, but it's not as simple as saying, I'm just throwing $10,000 out of today, and that 10,000 is going to carry me for the next 12, months or whatever.
I mean, and I think, like the comment I made to these guys at the time was, that's great. And next month, the bank's going to look for the next payment. It doesn't change. Like you said, it's a structured schedule. It doesn't change the fact that there's no payments being made for the next 11 months. You just threw a lot of money at principal, which is not a bad thing.
Yep.
Because, and so that gets to the kind of the byproduct question that comes up. So then they said to me, they said, well, George, we want to, be more aggressive on the loan too, because they went FHA. So they had 3.5% down. We looked at the purchase price relative to where they were. And I told them, one of the things you guys are going to have to think about is how do you build equity in this? I said, and equity usually comes by payments over time. 5-7 years in, people start to really build up into that getting that equity. Mm-hmm. And they listened and they said, hey, well, we want to get that faster. Again, they have that particular client has an ability to dial up and dial down how they generate income. So they said, we want to do that faster. I said, okay. So you can always pay more every month to hit the principal, which is going to end up pulling off the back end of the loan. So here was my suggestion to them. Tell me what you think about this. My suggestion to them was set up 2 separate payments. Your standard monthly payments for whatever that principal and interest is, your insurance, your taxes, that payment that goes out every month, and then do an additional one for like $100.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that. So, money that you put down at the beginning of the loan in additional principal payments is definitely doing a little bit more for you than if you did that on the back end of the loan, just because of the way the interest is set out. It's not simple interest where half of your payment every single month is interest and half is principal. It's amortized, which means that the graph kind of goes like this, where you're paying a ton of interest and then it gets to be less and less and less as you go along. So if you're paying more principal at the beginning, you are knocking off more of that interest later on. But then, there's also the way to look at this from just the pure number side, which is what's your interest rate? What's your appreciation rate on the property? Is that $100 put to better use somewhere else?
Okay, so let's break that question apart into two ones. But here I want to, because you made a comment about when to do that, putting that more cash down, and you made the point about not doing it towards the tail end of the loan. So because that's when it's almost all principal, there's barely any interest payment. So using me as an example, I have 3 years of payments left on this house. Okay, I could, quote unquote, write the check tomorrow to be done with it, but it would make absolutely no sense to do so because the cost of money at this point in time is negligible. I may have a 3.5% interest rate from when we refinanced it however long ago, but the amount of interest, quote unquote, that I'm paying against the appreciation of the property, it's costing me nothing to make this payment. So that doesn't make any sense, right? So is there a time frame? I'm going to come to those two questions, but is there a time frame where you look at somebody's loan and say, be less aggressive now with applying to the principal because you're now dipping into where cost of money is cheaper for you?
Yeah. I mean, I would say it's usually around the 10 or 12 year mark where you're paying more principal than interest. So once you hit that point, and that's a point too, where sometimes I get people to come to me and they say they're looking to refinance. And even if they want to refinance into a 15-year loan, it doesn't always make sense. Sometimes you're far enough into your loan that, refinancing it adds more interest over the life of the loan. Now, listen, if you have 3 years left on your loan, if you came to me and said, I want to refinance into a 30-year loan, your payment's going to be lower, obviously, but you're now going to be paying
But you're paying totality, you pay far more.
Yeah, way more interest again. So I've had people, they have 10 years left in their loan. They want to refinance into a 10-year mortgage. And I say, honestly, you know what? You're so over the hump of interest that it doesn't make sense. So if you are going to take that strategy of being aggressive with payments, the more aggressive you can be earlier on in your loan, the better. If that is your strategy, because I know we're about to talk about when that might not be the best strategy.
So let's talk. So there were 2 points you made, which is about interest rate and appreciative value. Okay, so let's break it down with the interest rate first. So let's say that somebody's coming in. I'm going to give you 3 examples. Okay, and we'll just stick with the simple. Let's just say they're all FHA. We won't get. There's buyer number 1. Bought a house, $250,000. We'll just use the same number and everything across the board for however relative that will be. So they bought a house, $250,000. They bought it in 2019, and their interest rate at the time was 3.9. Yeah. Buyer number 2 bought a house in 2020. They paid $275,000 for it. Their interest rate was 3. They bought buyer number 3 is buying in 2022. The house is $280,000, and their interest rate is 6.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a little bit of a play to what we're seeing in the market, in terms of pricing and rates and everything, but
pretty accurate too.
Interest rate view first.
So looking at it from a strict interest rate perspective here, you're always balancing what you're paying with what else your money could be doing for you. So 2019, 3.9% interest rate. Bonds were not very strong, but I think the stock market was still pretty strong, right?
Yeah.
So if you had $100, let's just say extra, you had $100 extra, you could either put it against 3.9% interest, meaning that you're trying to knock down, the amount of money that you're paying that interest on, or you could put it in the market where you might be getting a 8 to 10% return, or we'll just even call it a 7% return, which is about double that. That $100 extra is going to do better in the stock market because you're going to get more of a return than you're going to realize a loss. So by not putting that 100 towards the debt that you're accruing a 3.9% interest rate on, you're able to receive a gain of 7%. So you are getting enough to pay that extra, that 3.9%, you've got that covered, and you're coming out ahead a little bit. So
the only thing is in that example, the only thing is that you're obviously waiting for returns in the market. And, if you're putting $100 in, you're not buying a ton and getting a ton out, but the $100 itself, what it generates in value is the example you're giving.
yes.
Yeah.
Pure number. This is just a pure number standpoint. Now it's going to take some time for that to happen. Obviously you're going to have some capital gains from taking that money out of the market. So there's a lot of layers to it. Obviously, as we said, layers yesterday, there's always, multiple things that you have to look at with this, but from the pure numbers perspective, for that person buying in 2019.
So your point really there is, hey, listen, just because you bought it in 2019, you have a 3.9 interest rate, you have the ability to put a little bit extra towards the principal every month. That may not actually be the best place to use that money because it's really not costing you a lot to begin with. And there are other places where you may get better gains. So that's where that person may want to say, okay, yeah, I could put $100 more, but it's not really affecting that much on my loan. It's not like I'm doubling the payment. Doubling the payment would be a totally different scenario.
Yep.
Okay, so then we go from let's keep that same kind of mindset. And then you go to that next example, the buyer in 2020, they paid a little bit more for the house, but they had a slightly lower rate. Go over that one.
Yeah, I mean, once you're getting down to something like a 3% interest rate, it's so low. Now, granted, yes, home purchase is a big purchase, so you are paying a lot of interest over the life of the loan, and it's 30 years. There is a lot of interest there. But again, a 3% interest rate is very, very low. And again, during 2020, that was a time when the market was probably returning a 15% return. Yeah. So in that short time frame, from that short, mindset, the money is way better spent putting it into an investment, putting it into yourself, putting it into getting another job. This is when wages are starting to go up,
maybe you're just putting that cash aside for something because you're going to make an improvement on the house later on. I mean, I think that the thing is that you have to look at the cost of money, which is really the underscoring point you're making on these first two examples. The cost of money is so low that what it's costing you to own the house, you're not really gaining a lot by putting, I don't want to say $100 is not an amount of money, but at the end of the day, it's only $1,200 a year. Okay. Yep. So $1,200 a year is not something to just throw away. But if you put $1,200 into something else, whether it was you put it aside because you're going to do an improvement to the bathroom or something, that's going to get to our upcoming example about appreciative value. But we'll come back to that. But really, these first two examples, it really comes down to if you own the house and you have a reasonable or very low interest rate, it just might not make sense to put more money against the loan at this time.
Yeah, this is where it's very important to have a financial advisor, or if you're diligent yourself, right. you're working on this and you're aware of this. But this is where it's very important to start balancing. And this isn't a conversation that everyone's going to be having right off the bat either. Sometimes people just getting into a home has been a struggle, and now they're just trying to get their financial footing. In that instance, I'd say that money is probably best spent by not spending it, by keeping it in a cash reserve, by having some padding there to protect yourself from maybe an instance that comes up where you have to put something on a credit card, which has a 20% interest rate, So now, trying to
money is the opposite.
Exactly. Now by trying to chase a 10% return in the stock market versus, a 3% loss on your home, you incurred a 20% loss. So it's important to know where you are during this whole road of financial,
So there's a client that you and I worked with, and they fall right into what you just described, which is, they bought the house, they moved in, they were thrilled with it, but then some things happened. There was a big storm, they had an issue, and they had to deal with some things because of the outcome from the storm. I mean, Mother Nature hit. There was nothing that's not a flaw of the house. Okay.
Nope.
So they ended up having to put money into that house. Now, if they had been making those additional payments, that would be something they'd then have to stop. Not a big deal, but they would have to stop that. But what we always try and tell people, or at least I do, is, that first year of ownership, just calm down. Do the basics, just get used to owning it. I tell everybody when you first move into that house, because everybody goes in saying, George, we've already got our game plan. We know what we're doing day one. And I go, yeah.
You haven't lived there long enough.
The minute you move in, the priority that you had when you walked through and you said, I really don't like that, changes the day you move in, 9 times out of 10. And my favorite story is when my wife and I bought this house, she said to me, day one, she said, when we close on this, she goes, I want that carpet out of there. I hate that carpet. I said, okay, got it. She goes, I can't stand it. I said, okay, got it. 7 years later, we got rid of the carpet.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's
priorities changed.
Yes. And it's amazing too. Again, like you said, give it some time. Once you get into the home, the thing that you thought was so important, like we need to spend $30,000 on a kitchen. It's got to happen. I got to. And then you're living in it and, you say, well, you know what? We're also thinking about kids. We're also thinking about, I want to go back to school, or we want to, go on a good vacation. Yeah. All of a sudden the kitchen's like, you know what? This wasn't as bad as we thought it was.
I mean, if there's things that are just effective, that's one thing. But okay, so now let's take that third example. So that person just bought recently, now they're spending nearly $300,000. Their interest rate is about 6%.
Yeah.
They are capable of carrying it. Obviously, they've been approved for the loan, so they're good to go there. But at the end of the day, this is somebody where you say, hey, cost of money is different for you.
Yes. Yeah. Now also we're in 2022 where the market is highly volatile.
Right.
So as far as better investments go, right now they're out there. They're harder to find. It's not the easy market of 2020 or 2021 where everyone was a stock market genius because it just went up. So now you're in a position where I would say if you have, everything set financially, otherwise you have a good little cushion built up, nothing wrong with putting some more money towards that principal.
Attacking the principal. So the underlying story is low interest rate may not make the advantage of attacking the principal early in the loan. High interest rate, if capable, attack the principal, because then you're taking off the back end of the loan and you're going to get to reducing what your total cost on the house is until you go to refinance it, which is a whole other topic of how to refi, when to refi, because like you said, after the 10-year mark, if somebody has a lot of equity in it, it may not make sense to refinance it because you're just actually putting more cost onto the house over time. And some people refinance, some people just go get a HELOC on the home, that's a topic for another day, is a HELOC.
Something else interesting that I do want to point out here that I've done the calculation for a couple people when they're looking at a 15-year or 30-year.
Right.
Sometimes what I'll do is I'll say, all right, well, let's just do a simple, investment calculator. Whatever that difference is between the payments, let's call it $400, $500 a month. And we'll put it into investment calculator 15 years out, and we'll say 6 to 7%, rate of return. And we'll say that, we know that our interest rate on the home is going to be X percentage. A lot of times that money going into investments over 15 years, when you hit that 15-year mark, not only do you have enough money to pay off what's left now on that loan, you have a little extra in the bank. So that is the power of, and again, this isn't for everybody. This is people who are in that place where they have that flexibility and can choose, because not everyone has the ability to choose. But it's just saying that, there's this other layer to all of this that you can take into account if you want to go down that path. We are happy to have those conversations.
And you made the point earlier. I mean, at the end of the day, it's always best as well that if you find yourself in a position to use somebody, whether it be an accountant that can help you with tax planning, and even some accountants do investment planning, or getting a financial advisor. It has nothing to do with how much money somebody makes.
No,
everybody can benefit from talking to a third party who focuses on financial, planning, financial use, investment strategy, because none of us can figure it out by ourselves. You talk to some of these analysts or some of these advisors, they have whole teams of people who break down different market segments, who study just industrial, who study just healthcare, things like that, because it's just too complicated for one person to try and be knowledgeable enough to do everything. And so I think it's great when they can talk to you about, how do I look at this, and what's the cost of the life of the loan, et cetera, and so forth. If I would put money elsewhere, those are all important things. But, when we get back to, there's one thing I would say is that when you look at it, the market right now may not be the best place to park money because of the volatility, but a house is a long-term. And so day one, I tell people this, day one, it is not an asset. It is a liability, because until you have enough equity in that you can play that off, until you have enough equity in it, it is a liability. And until it has value above and beyond what you paid for, it is a liability.
Yep.
Which leads to that second piece, which is the appreciative return. Okay. So let me just kind of give one scenario here, because this is, and I'm going to use, all right. So here's a client. They bought their house in 2000, early 2019. And let me think. I'm trying to remember. I think they paid 265. I think they paid for it. 255 or 265. I can't remember which it was. Yeah, average house, 2,200 square feet. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 bath. Just a good average house. Maybe a little bit bigger on square footage wise, but that house today, because I've been talking to them lately, because they're saying, George, should we sell our house? Well, the house today has a $70,000 swing in value for 2 reasons. Market is creating some of that, but the changes that they've made, the improvements they've made on that home are not insignificant.
Yeah.
They didn't dump a ton of cash into it, but they dumped money into the right places. And, I was out there, they invited me out, took a walk through, and I just kind of snapped my head back. I'm like, holy cow, this is an entirely different house in some ways. So the house has now got new value in it. So they had, at the time of their closing, I think they were at they were just over 4% on an interest rate. Because we said that was a good rate, no problem. But now they have what you were touching on earlier. They have the difference of appreciation now. So now it gets back to, do they put money against the loan? All of that. They're in a totally different scenario. Their house is worth nearly $100,000 more than it was when they bought it 2 years ago. Probably about 72, maybe, and change.
Yeah. Yeah. So that is a situation where, and again, it's always about, being smart with it. If they had put those dollars against the loan, they would not have generated that return most likely. So they would have avoided a 4% interest rate on that dollar. But if they were smart, like you said, if they didn't go overboard, because, we talked in one of the videos, the 203K one, about how if you go marble,
right,
wall, floor, ceiling in your bathroom, you're going to lose money on that. But if you do smart upgrades, if you do a nice countertop, but you're not swinging for the fences, if you do a nice kitchen upgrade, if you put in nice cabinets, but you're not going full custom, your dollar can turn into a 100% return. If you put in, and it's probably not that, extreme, but, if you put in a $10,000, $15,000 kitchen, and now somebody says, well, that added $20,000 to $25,000 worth of equity, that was a very smart use of your money. And you would not have gotten that gain just by putting it against the loan. So now when you're talking about that swing, appreciation, we always say is, around 2 to 4%, right? Each year. So you can factor that against the interest rate, so if your interest rate is 4% and you just undertook this project that's going to give you a, 4% appreciation, you kind of cancel out your interest rate for the year, so that was a smart use of that money.
So in their case, and sticking with this example, because there are those who have the mindset of, all right, George, and I think you're going to know who I'm referring to in this example. Hey, George, we're going to make the following changes. We're going to update the roof. We're going to pop new windows. We're going to do the siding. We're going to do all these things. And then we want to sell the house. Okay, but you just bought the house a year ago.
Yeah, that can be a tough situation because appreciation takes time. Unless whatever you're doing, unless you found a home that, exactly. Yeah. So you would have had to have a home that was almost unsellable without those updates. And so you got it at this great price. If you just got a home that needed some updates and not a renovation is what we'll
that's
say.
The thing. This house, in using this one example, sorry to cut you off, using this one example, the house didn't need it.
Yeah.
This was a voluntary change. And so I'm looking at it and I'm saying, okay, hang on a second. Yeah, that's going to be nice. But you already paid near peak when you bought the house. Yes, it has gone up a little bit because market being what it is. And when I refer to market, I don't mean the general market. I mean neighborhood level market, because we look at things down to the neighborhood level to see what's the value appreciation between one house and another. Because, in certain towns, you can go blocks away and it's a very different market. All right. In their case, they've put this money in, or were planning to. They didn't do it. They were planning to, and because they wanted to then turn around and sell the house with less than a year of ownership. So there were a couple things you and I talked about. Number one, it's going to be how much is it going to actually appreciate in the current situation that it is. Number two, how much are they putting in terms of how much cash is coming out of pocket. Number three, what do they owe on the loan still? You know, so that all those things start to factor in. And now you're looking and saying, yeah, now we may not be able to sell the house and have you free and clear. You walk away with nothing.
You still need some time. It depends on how much you put down. You know, if you put down a big chunk at the start, then you might be walking out okay. It might still not be what you're thinking. But like you said, every home you have to think of has this scale of where it can appraise in the market, you know, and you can buy it down here and you do some renovations and you pop it up to here and you're getting that bonus. But if you purchase a home that's right here near its limit of where it can appraise and what it can actually be worth in the neighborhood, on the street, in the town, in the state, you give yourself less wiggle room. So if you bought a home that doesn't need the renovations, but you like them, then understand that you are probably going to want to stay in that property for a couple of years. I'd say 5, 10, 15, because if you're just doing it because you like it, and I want to say that too, is I would never tell somebody, if you love marble bathrooms and that is what you want, do it. But just realize that it's not going to be a return. I mean, the classic case is a pool, right? So people put in those value. Yeah, people put in in-ground pools and they spent 50 grand and they're like, I love this pool. Well, I hope that you love it, because it doesn't mean that somebody else is going to pay you for the work that you did.
And that's a topic for another day. I mean, there are changes you can make to a property. There are changes you can make to a home that actually do not add value in any way, shape, or form. And a lot of people think, well, you know, we use the pool as the example. And again, I won't get too stuck on this, but people put in pools and they say, hey, at the end of the day, I put in this pool. Shouldn't I get more money for the house? Not necessarily.
Why? You know, it's the same with, again, it's the same exact, it's such a crazy example, but a wall-to-wall marble bathroom is the perfect example of why, because less people would pay for that, right? So you might love it and you might say, yeah, I spent $15,000 just to do this one bathroom, and someone's going to go, but why? I don't care.
Were you following me the other day? Because I went and did a showing on a house that literally had, it wasn't marble, but it was floor to ceiling. I mean, ceiling, man. Even everything was tiled.
Wow.
Shiny tile. Like, all I kept thinking of is, man, any moisture buildup in this bathroom, you're going to feel like you're sliding away all over the place. I mean, you know, everything, even the soaking tub was, wasn't tiled, but it was a high gloss porcelain, you know, all this. I'm looking, I'm like, man, there's no place in this bathroom that if it gets wet that you are not going to feel like you need a safety rail.
Yeah. But somebody thought that was great. And that's, so, you know, and that's what you have to understand is whatever you're doing, is somebody going to come along and say, you know, this is a little much. A standard kitchen, you know, right now it's the white shaker cabinets and, you know, the decent granite countertop is probably all great. But if you're going to do this full custom, you know, I want wood that I cut down from the backyard, it's going to go to the mill and someone's going to mill it into, you know, that's great. If that is your project and passion for that home, that's fantastic. But it is not necessarily going to get you the appreciation or the return on investment, which is the thing that we have to understand. Is the two sides of this. There's the return, there's the money side, and then there's the emotional side. If you're doing it for emotion, and some people pay off a mortgage early purely for emotional reasons, and that is perfectly fine. If you feel great not having a mortgage, I would never say that it is the wrong thing for you to do if that makes you feel comfortable. But from a pure financial standpoint, you better be maxing out your 401k, at least the company match. You better have all of your deductibles covered for your insurance plans. You better be contributing to your HSA if you have one, maxing out your, you know, all those things from a pure financial standpoint.
Put the money somewhere.
Are a better use of money. But if you are sitting there and saying, you know, what would make me so much more relaxed in my home is knowing I didn't have a mortgage on it, go for it.
The only thing is, on top of that, and this is, again, we could go down another rabbit hole here. When you pay off the mortgage, you no longer have the mortgage contributing to your credit. You know, so because that is a structured payment that is showing consistency, that's one of those things that gets your credit score to stay afloat and can improve upon it. Because if all you're then doing is saying, well, I carry a gas card, a credit card, and my car is paid off, my house is paid off, and I'm feeling so much better about life because I don't have those major bills. I agree with that mentality 100%. Our cars are paid off. You know, I refuse to go out and buy a new vehicle because I do not want a car payment ever again. that's only realistic for maybe another year or so. But the point is, I enjoy not writing the check on the car payment.
Yeah.
But that car payment's not contributing to my credit score now, as
Correct.
a house payment does not. And then you have the tax deductions on your interest and everything else that comes into it. So I think it's good to let the life of the loan run, because it's not hurting you, unless you have the need to pay it off for some reason. But as you get to the tail end of the loan, what'd you say, about 10, 12 years in, that's really when you start dipping into principal.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I tell a lot of people. You are better off just because the cost of money at that point in time is so low against you.
Oh, gosh.
Unless you need that cash for some reason, which you'd be upfronting all the cash. But anyway, you get that.
No, from a pure financial standpoint, if the longest loan you can take out with the lowest interest rate, anyone who got a 30-year loan over the last
2 years,
2 years, and they were, I think I locked someone in at a 2.5% interest rate. If a home appreciates at 2 to 4% per year, you're canceling out your real interest rate on that home is damn near zero. That is free money.
So just real quick, and then we're going to wrap up here. Just real quick though, because we do talk a lot, you and I talk a lot about home equity and what you get from it, appreciation on the home and everything. And that is a more complicated conversation, because what a lot of people don't realize is a house appreciates because it's maintained and improved upon over time. It doesn't just appreciate because of its existence.
Correct.
So if Bill owns his house and Bill, changed the siding after 5 years of ownership, he replaced some of the utilities, he updated the boiler, over the life of the ownership of that home, he just made those improvements, and at some point in time did the roof, and then he changed the decking from wood to a permanent material, whatever. Those are things that improve the value of the home because they've given the home more life. Changing windows, changing doors, they give the house more life. What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that fundamentally a house, when it's built, the foundation that it's on is a consideration. And I'll make this one last point to when we talk about how a house appreciates, a lot of people look at the cosmetics only.
Yeah.
And what you have to remember is that if you bought a house that was built in 1910 and it's a gorgeous colonial and you've updated it over time, it is still sitting on a fieldstone foundation and a dirt basement. That is going to still hold that house down in value comparison, even though you did a full update to the kitchen, because it is still sitting on a fieldstone foundation with a dirt basement. So this is where you have to always look at what it is you're doing on the house to create appreciation. But what a lot of people think is that they can just go through and make changes, or they think that a house is just simply going to appreciate over time because it exists. And the latter is just not true.
Yep. Yeah. You have to keep up with the market in some sense. And this is, it goes back to what we had talked about before, which is having your entry and your exit plan. That fieldstone foundation, might be gorgeous for a little while. And if you plan to live there forever, then, great. But if you're thinking it's going to be, 5 years and you're just going to throw some paint on and, do that might not, somebody might be coming through and their concern might be more, well, what are the bones of this house?
That's just it.
Is this house in good shape or?
That's just it. So when we talked at the beginning about, attacking the loan, looking at interest rate, comparing those things, where's your best use of money? The same holds true for the assumption of appreciation. A house will appreciate year over year over year as long as it's well maintained and updated, but it does have certain things that can hold it back in comparison to other homes. So
yeah.
I could go on that topic for hours. I get it every time I show houses, people ask me questions about these things, and I just sit there and I always say,
"Don't get me started."
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. All right. So before we wrap up here, any last thoughts on this?
No, I think we covered a lot. I think it's, as you had said, it's more and more important to have the full team around you. As you start, I know we're going to do a video in the future about, starting the process. And one of the first steps in starting a home purchase process, I think, is starting to build your team. Talk to a realtor, find a loan officer, get an insurance agent, and have that kind of that triad ready to go. But then also, it doesn't matter how big or small you are. Have a good tax preparer. Have someone who's going to make sure that your losses to taxes are going to be as minimal as possible. Have a good financial advisor, somebody who is going to make your gain on your money. Because remember, you're working for your money. So you're exchanging your time for your dollar. So you want that dollar to be put to its best use. You don't want it to be taken due to taxes. You don't want it to be eaten up to interest, but you also do want it to be put to work. If that dollar can be put to work in an investment that is, going to have a great return and it's not super volatile, then that might be the best use for it. But you have to have a team around you who's going to help you figure all that out.
Yeah, and I would say that was something you said that I would just add one point to it. I always tell people, know how you're getting out before you get in.
Yep.
When you're buying a house, if getting out is, George, we're going to be here for the next 20 years. Okay, so now getting out is 20 years.
Yeah.
If it's, George, this is an interim house. Okay, so getting out in 5 to 7 years? Because that should influence what you're buying, how much you're paying, where you're buying. All of those things should be factored into that then, because now you're looking at a house where you're saying, all right, I think I'm going to be here for all the way through my kids going through high school, and getting into college, and probably after college, that's when we're going to move. Well, that's a 20 plus year house.
Yeah.
So now you're buying a house that now you get into the appreciation, the cost of money, all those things are a different game plan than somebody who says, I need a house right now. I need to move out of the current situation. And it's not going to be a long-term plan. We're going to go and do something different down, in a short period of time. Okay. So that's your plan. Plans change, but that's your plan. So now you buy differently. You invest into that home differently, because now you're not thinking about doing that $20,000 kitchen upgrade, because you're not going to see that. You're probably not going to see enough value from that over the next 5 years.
Yeah.
Of course, who knows if we're having still the kind of pricing conditions.
It's possible.
Who knows? All right, listen, I won't keep us. I could just keep going on some of this stuff. I find it fascinating.
Agreed. Yep. Me too.
All right, man. Hey, listen, have a great Sunday. Again, happy Mother's Day to your family. And hope you guys all do something great. The weather today is supposed to be phenomenal. So
yeah, it's looking like it. So we'll talk tomorrow.
All right, man. I'll catch you in the morning. See you,
George. Bye.